Hello, this is Jay Mahaffey from the Scott Learning Center in Scott, Mississippi. I did a video last week about soybean skip, stands, and planting errors, and in an effort to keep it relatively brief, I didn't get through all the information I'd like to cover, so I thought I'd take a few minutes today and talk about a couple of other subjects that we've addressed over the previous few years. Soybeans are the largest acreage crop that we support from Scott. We have about 6.5 million acres of soybeans in the surrounding 4 or 5 states. And as a result, we get a lot of questions about all the various things that happen in soybean fields, row configurations, replants, skippy stands, all those kind of things. And as a result, we try to generate as much data about those subjects as we can. Couple of cautions about this work. We try to simulate what goes on in the field best way we can, but we don't typically, we can't make things intentionally go as badly as they do in many fields sometimes. So take that into consideration when you use this data. Also, our plants are typically not diseased when we do this sort of work. So you have to consider all those factors when you go out and make a decision in an individual field. Our effort in this was to try to, we really didn't have a disease component to this work. What we were doing was simulating difficulties that do occur when we have machinery problems and those kind of things. So let's talk a little bit about what we've done. We've worked on skippy stands. I talked about that some in the last video. We've actually simulated missing rows where you have a machinery malfunction, chain comes off a planting unit or something like that. And then we've worked on reduced stands, the ability of soybeans to compensate. And we've done this in several years, and I'm going to show you a brief summary of it through this conversation today. So the first thing that we want to talk about today is that we actually went out over 2015, 2016, and as a result of grower input, I had a couple of folks call and ask me a question where they had a machinery malfunction, a chain came off a planter unit or something like that. And they wanted to know, was that missing row across the field an issue? Should they replant the entire field? Should they replant that individual row? What is the yield impact of those sorts of machinery malfunctions when they occur? And I think this is useful and teaches us a couple of lessons about soybeans in general. So what we did was took several varieties over 2015, 2016. It says 16 on the screen, but I'm going to show both years' data. Went out and simulated that sort of thing by leaving seed out of a planter unit. We had several treatments that were present in the field in this work. This was planted with our twin row monosome planter. And we had really several varieties, and the variety background I'm leaving out of this conversation because it just may get to be too much, but we actually took our planter, we planted a 4-row check plot at 150,000 plants per acre, and we planted a 4-row plot with one entire row missing. So you see a stand that would be actually on the land acre out there in that particular case. But we also took a couple of other steps, and we planted one twin out of the 8 in a 4-row monosome twin row pass missing. So that's effectively 12.5% of the plants in that pass gone. And we also planted another treatment where we had 2 separated monosome twins that are in the twins planted by the monosome planter that didn't come up or whatever. They just weren't there. We left the seed out. So we could then simulate the distribution of those plants when those things happen in the field, whether or not it was a mechanical issue or just had a twin that didn't come up well. Y'all have seen these things probably in the field scattered around. Bad things happen to everybody, it seems, us included. And this is an example of the entire missing row and the check plot on either side. And this is an example of the 2 missing twins that were really separated. So effectively, you've got the same amount missing from each of those 2 plots. They're just in different distributions. So in 2015, we took 4 of the prevalent varieties that were in the market at that time. We planted this work, and I'm going to show you the data here. You can see that the check plot was about 62 or a little better bushels per acre in yield. The missing row, basically there was no difference. The 2 separated twins, they were actually no different. And the single missing twin, you couldn't tell it was gone. So in 2015, we did not see a huge impact of any of these treatments in the field versus a check. In 2016, we took other varieties and redid the test. And it was done in a similar way using a similar set of parameters. And you see here that in 2016, which was not a very pleasant year in the mid to late summer, we had a lot of rain, we had a lot of issues that went on in the field. You can see the missing row was down versus the check a little bit. It probably made 62 or so, and the check was about 68. The question becomes, can you justify replanting based on that sort of yield response with all the seed expense and trouble and diesel and labor and wear and tear that goes into it? The single missing twin was basically the same as the check plot, and the two separated twins were in that same magnitude of influence. So it appears that these missing rows, whether it's an entire row or a missing twin, is not a huge issue in soybeans. The caution I would issue in this whole conversation is that be aware, if you've got bare spots in the field, you may need to up the weed control applications or rates or timings that are required to maintain sound weed control across the field. Now, one other thing we've done over the previous couple of years is evaluate replant decisions in soybeans. And this is effectively two studies in one. One thing that we did was evaluate a planting date component, which is inherent to having to replant. You plant on two different dates. The other thing is that we were trying to evaluate, should I start over in the soybean? Should I start clean? Because that's the answer in corn, is we have found through our research that in cornfields, if we have to replant, we need to conclusively replant. Start over, kill off the plants that are there, plant new plants, get a uniform stand, because that drives yield in corn. Our question was, should we do that in soybeans? Now, and planted a couple of different treatments over time through the year. Now, this work turned out to be very interesting. Our normal stand was 120,000 seeds per acre. We had a reduced population of about 60,000. Then we replanted 60 into 60. And then we replanted another 120 as a check plot on the second date, and attempted to on the third date. We made one error there that I'll explain in a minute. This was done in our system at Scott. We used 5 different soybean varieties in the work. They were relatively large plots for a research setting of about 1/10 of an acre each. They were planted on 38-inch single row beds. These were not twin row, because we figured the difference in this would be larger in a single row planting than a twin, so we'd make it the worst case. Now, the treatments that we planted, here they are on the screen. When you look at that, treatment 1 was the check. It was 120,000 plants or seeds planted on date 1. Treatment 2 was 60,000, which is a greatly reduced stand. Then we came back on day 2, planting day 2, about 3 weeks later, and we planted 60,000 into 60. We planted another 120,000 check and another 60,000, which would effectively be a check for the planting dates and the populations. And then on the next day, which was June 19th, we planted 60 back into 60, and the one error we made was we planted a 60,000 check. We didn't get 120,000 check planted on that date. So we can see the impact of population, we can see the impact of replanting, starting over clean, or planting into standing plants from all of these treatments. So what did we see after we harvested all these plots? You see the 120,000 plants early planted, or seeds planted early, was the highest yielding treatment in the test. That's why we do that as a commercial practice. There was a little bit of yield reduction from the 60,000, the greatly reduced stand planted early. That's why we try to maintain those stands in that neighborhood of about 120,000 an acre, or planted populations of 120,000 an acre. I didn't really gain anything by planting 60 into 60. On the second planting date, the third bar from the left there, you see where I started over clean, which is what the 120,000 on the second planting date would simulate. I didn't gain anything from that, really, versus keeping the original reduced stand. The 60,000 planted on the second date might have been a little bit lower yielding than the higher population planted then, but I certainly didn't gain anything on the third date either by planting 60 into 60. And the only treatment that was greatly reduced in yield potential was the 60,000 plants planted late. That was the one mistake that we made. We didn't get 120,000 check planted in that particular case. So what does all this mean? I think from these results we can kind of generalize and say that soybeans have a tremendous ability to compensate for missing plants. Whether those plants are in missing rows from the skips, simulated skips like I showed in the previous video about soybean planting and soybean planting errors, there was very little yield advantage in this work of filling in thin stands. Whether we started over or we simply went back and added a few seeds to an existing stand that was really thin. There was a yield reduction observed from population across the planting dates. It was greatly more significant at the later planting date, although we did not have that check plot in there. But the only plot or treatment that was really greatly reduced in its yield potential was that lower stand planted later. I think it's fair to look at this work and say that we can expect at least favorable yields on some of those lower planted rates or surviving rates, as long as we have healthy plants that are fairly uniformly distributed across the field. We'll have other videos coming, and I think I'm going to summarize all of this in the planting configuration work that we did in the last 2 or 3 years, where we've planted from as accurately to as inaccurately as you could plant soybeans. If you'd like more information or more detail, the varietal background and all the other background information that I've shown in this data, feel free to drop us an email at one of the addresses on the screen, or call us at the number, call me directly at the number on the screen. We'll be happy to try to talk through anything you'd like to talk about. The Learning Center staff is always there to help. If you have some input or an idea that you think we ought to incorporate into our program for the year to help answer some questions, we'd be happy to try to do that. Your local Bayer reps are always available to help talk through the decisions, and we appreciate you listening. We look forward to seeing you in the field this summer. Thanks.